The wagon train had been attacked at dawn, 3 miles from the Peterson ranch. By the time Thomas Peterson heard the gunshots echoing across the valley and rode out with his men, it was already over. The bandits had taken what they wanted: horses, supplies, whatever valuables the settlers carried, and left behind only destruction and death. Thomas had seen violence before. The frontier demanded it, bred it, made it as common as the dust that blew across the plains. But what he found that morning made even his hardened heart clench with rage and sorrow. Bodies lay scattered across the trail, some still clutching weapons they'd never had the chance to use. Wagons burned, sending black smoke spiraling into the pale morning sky. Horses that hadn't been stolen lay dead in their traces. And among it all, the sound of crying, thin, desperate, and utterly helpless. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground as he scanned the carnage for survivors. His ranch hands spread out, checking each body, looking for anyone who might still be breathing. Most weren't. The bandits had been thorough, and they'd been cruel. That's when he saw her. She was crawling, dragging herself across the blood-soaked earth with what must have been the last of her strength. Her dress was torn and stained dark with blood. Too much blood. One hand clutched her side where she'd been shot, while the other reached desperately forward, toward something just beyond her grasp. Thomas ran to her, dropping to his knees beside her. "Ma'am, don't move. Let me help you." But she didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes, glazed with pain and shock, were fixed on something ahead. Her lips moved, forming words he had to strain to hear. "My baby, my baby." Thomas followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. There, just a few feet away, partially obscured by an overturned crate, something small squirmed in the dirt. The crying he'd heard wasn't coming from the woman. It was coming from an infant, no more than a few months old, lying face down in the dust and debris where it had apparently been thrown or dropped during the attack. He moved quickly, gently easing the woman onto her back. "I'm going to get your baby. Just hold on." Thomas crawled the short distance to where the infant lay and carefully lifted it from the dirt. It was a girl, he realized, tiny and red-faced from crying, her little fists waving in distress. Miraculously, she appeared unharmed, dirty and terrified, but breathing strong and healthy. He brushed the dust from her face as gently as he could and turned back to the mother. The woman's eyes had found her daughter, and for a moment, something like peace crossed her features despite the pain. Thomas carried the baby to her, kneeling so she could see. "She's alive," he said softly. "She's going to be all right." The woman's hand lifted, trembling, and touched her daughter's cheek. A tear rolled down her own dirt-streaked face. "Promise me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Promise me, you'll take care of her." Thomas felt something twist in his chest. He'd never married, had no children of his own. His life was the ranch, the cattle, the endless work of surviving in this harsh land. He'd told himself that was enough, that he didn't need anything else. But looking at this dying woman and her innocent baby, he felt something shift inside him. "I promise," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The woman's eyes searched his face, as if trying to determine whether she could trust him with her most precious possession. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slightly. "Her name is Emma. Emma Grace." "Emma Grace," Thomas repeated, committing it to memory. "That's a beautiful name. Tell her." The woman's breathing was becoming more labored now, her words coming in gasps. "Tell her. I loved her. Tell her. I tried." "I'll tell her," Thomas promised. "I swear it." The woman's hand fell away from her daughter's face, and her eyes closed. For a moment, Thomas thought she was gone, but then her lips moved one last time. "Thank you." And then she was still. Thomas sat there in the dirt, holding a baby that wasn't his, next to a woman whose name he didn't even know, and felt the weight of his promise settle over him like a mantle. Around him, his ranch hands were moving through the wreckage, but everything felt distant, muffled, as if he and this child were in a world of their own. The baby, Emma, had stopped crying when he'd picked her up. Now she stared at him with wide, dark eyes that seemed far too knowing for someone so small. She didn't understand that her mother was gone, that her entire world had just ended before it had barely begun. But she would someday. And when that day came, Thomas wanted to be able to tell her that her mother's last act had been one of love, of ensuring her daughter would be cared for. Boss. One of his men, a grizzled cowhand named Jack, approached cautiously. There are a few others still breathing. Not many, but a few. Should we load them onto the wagon?
Thomas nodded, still cradling Emma.
Anyone who can be saved, we save.
Enne no essegone, we bury with respect.
This was someone's family, someone's fresh start. The least we can do is give them dignity in death. Jack's eyes dropped to the baby in Thomas's arms, then to the dead woman beside him. What about the little one? Thomas looked down at Emma, at her tiny fingers that had wrapped around one of his much larger ones without him even realizing it. She's mine now, he said simply. I gave her mother my word. If Jack thought this was strange, a bachelor rancher suddenly acquiring a baby, he was wise enough not to say so. He just nodded and moved away to help with the other survivors. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Thomas and his men worked to bring order to chaos. They found 3 other survivors, a teenage boy with a broken leg, an elderly couple who'd hidden under their wagon, and a middle-aged man who'd been shot but would likely live. They loaded them carefully into the ranch wagon, along with what supplies could be salvaged. The dead they buried in a row beside the trail, marked with simple crosses made from wagon wood. Thomas stood over the grave of Emma's mother and said a prayer, the baby still held securely in his arms. He wished he knew the woman's name, could give her that much dignity at least. But all he had was the name she'd given her daughter, and the promise he'd made. The ride back to the ranch was somber and slow, mindful of the injured survivors they carried. Emma slept for most of it, exhausted from her ordeal, nestled in the crook of Thomas's arm. He'd never held a baby before, had never had reason to, but he found it came naturally enough. She was so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on him now. The weight of that responsibility was staggering. When they finally reached the ranch, Thomas's housekeeper, Martha, came rushing out. She was a widow who'd worked for him for 5 years, managing his household with stern efficiency. But when she saw the baby in his arms, her stern expression melted into something softer. Lord have mercy, she breathed.
Thomas, what happened?
He told her, briefly and without emotion, because if he let himself feel at all, he might not be able to function. Martha listened with her hand over her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. When he finished, she simply held out her arms. Give her here, she said gently. That baby needs cleaning up, feeding, and proper care. You've done well bringing her home, but she needs a woman's touch now. Thomas felt a strange reluctance to hand Emma over, even to capable Martha. But he knew she was right. What did he know about caring for an infant? He passed the sleeping child carefully to his housekeeper and watched as Martha cooed over her, checking her for injuries, murmuring soft words of comfort. She'll need milk, Martha said, already heading toward the house. And clothes, proper baby clothes. I'll send one of the men into town for supplies.
Don't you worry, Thomas.
We'll take care of this little angel. Over the next few days, the ranch transformed. Martha took charge of Emma's care with the devotion of a grandmother, but she insisted that Thomas remain involved. You made a promise to that child's mother, she reminded him. She needs to know you, to trust you. You can't just hand her off and forget about her. So Thomas found himself learning things he'd never imagined he'd need to know.
How to hold a bottle at the right angle.
How to support a baby's head. How to tell the difference between a hungry cry and a tired cry and a cry that meant something needed changing. It was exhausting and terrifying and completely foreign to everything he'd known before. But it was also, surprisingly, wonderful. Emma was a good baby, all things considered. She slept reasonably well, ate eagerly, and when she was content, she would stare at Thomas with those dark eyes and sometimes offer a toothless smile that made his heart constrict in ways he couldn't explain. She became part of the rhythm of the ranch, her cries mixing with the sounds of cattle and horses, her presence a reminder that life continued even in the aftermath of tragedy. The survivors from the wagon train recovered slowly. Thomas learned that Emma's mother had been named Catherine Wells, traveling west with her husband who'd been killed in the attack. The teenage boy was their nephew, and he confirmed what Thomas had already guessed. that Catherine had been fiercely protective of her daughter, had died trying to reach her after she'd been knocked from her mother's arms during the chaos. 3 weeks after the attack, a man rode up to the ranch. He was well-dressed, official-looking, with papers in his saddlebag and an air of authority. He introduced himself as Jacob Morrison, a territorial marshal investigating the wagon train massacre. "I'm told you rescued some survivors," Morrison said, accepting the coffee Martha offered him. "Including an infant." Thomas felt his shoulders tense. "That's right. Her name is Emma Grace Wells."
Ah. Morrison pulled out a notebook. "The Wells baby."
"Yes, I've been looking into her situation. Catherine Wells had a sister back east. I've sent word, but it will take time for correspondence to reach her and for her to make arrangements to come west, if she chooses to."
"And if she doesn't choose to?"
Thomas asked, though he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. "Then the child will need to be placed in an orphanage until a suitable family can be found to adopt her." Thomas set his coffee cup down carefully, trying to control the sudden surge of protectiveness he felt. "That won't be necessary. I'm adopting her." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "You?
A bachelor rancher."
"That's highly irregular, Mr. Peterson." "I don't care if it's irregular. I made a promise to her mother as she lay dying. I told her I would care for Emma, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." "It's not that simple," Morrison began, but Thomas cut him off. "It is that simple. I have means to provide for her. I have a good home, stable income, and people here who already love her like family." He gestured to where Martha sat in the corner, rocking Emma in her arms.
"She belongs here."
"With us." Morrison studied him for a long moment.
"You understand what you're taking on."
"Raising a child alone, especially a girl? She'll need education, proper upbringing, things a rough rancher might not be equipped to provide." "Then I'll learn," Thomas said firmly. "I'll hire tutors when she's old enough. I'll make sure she has everything she needs. But I'm not sending her away."
"She has semine now."
"Both she and her mother. I made a promise to both of them." The marshal seemed taken aback by the passion in Thomas's voice. He made some notes in his book, then nodded slowly. "I'll need to check with the territorial authorities, but given the circumstances and your standing in the community, I don't see why your petition for adoption wouldn't be approved. Especially if the aunt declines to take her." Relief flooded through Thomas. "Thank you." As Morrison prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mr. Peterson, I think you're doing a good thing. That baby is lucky to have someone who cares so much." After he left, Thomas walked over to where Martha sat with Emma. The baby was awake, one tiny fist stuffed into her mouth, her eyes bright and curious. She saw Thomas and made a happy gurgling sound, reaching toward him with her free hand. He took her from Martha, settling her into his arms with the ease of growing practice. Emma grabbed his finger and held on tight, and Thomas felt that now familiar tightening in his chest. "Both are mine now," he murmured, remembering that moment in the dirt when he'd picked up this precious child and made his promise to her dying mother. "And I'll do right by both of you. I swear it." Emma made another happy sound and smiled at him, and Thomas knew, with absolute certainty, that his life had changed forever. The lonely rancher had become a father, and the baby thrown in the dirt had become his daughter. And he wouldn't have had it any other way.